Welcome back to Online Ed 2022. I'll hand you back to the conference chair, Stella Ekabusi. Stella, over to you.
Thank you so much. Welcome back. We're now in the session, what will it take to tackle both the ed and the tech, navigating the transformation of education with agility and at scale, with Mike McGuinness from Southern New Hampshire University. Before I hand over to Mike, just to say, don't forget to type your questions in the Q&A box at any point throughout the session. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Stella, and thank you for joining this session. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining from. I probably brought more slides to this than I need to try to tackle, so I'm going to move through them relatively quickly. But I want to start off by saying I haven't spent a long time in higher ed, so full disclosure. I've spent the better part of my career working in highly disrupted industries and, for example, music, publishing, and most recently broadcast. And there's a lot of parallels, in my opinion, where we're bringing content to personalized audience experiences. And it's what attracted me to higher ed. In addition to the fact that I do teach a course and I'm experiencing what it's like to teach and for some folks to learn in a hybrid environment. So very passionate about what we're doing up here at Southern New Hampshire and looking forward to sharing some of my observations and key learnings based on what I've seen in other industries and how it applies here. Hopefully, you will put up with my metaphor around improvisation and music for those of you that play an instrument or enjoy music, but hopefully this resonates with all of you. So we'll jump right in and start with what are we going to talk about. And really, one of my primary observations is that there's an increased need in any disrupted industry, but particularly in what we're facing in higher ed, to figure out a way to play together. And to do it in a way where we're all understanding what is the song we're creating, what is the experience we're creating, and from that, what is the score that's going to outline how we play together. And there's a difference between a score and an arrangement, and I'm intentional with that. An arrangement is when you take an existing piece of music and you arrange it differently, and a score is when you score something completely new. And I think there's a combination of that going on in higher ed. We have to leverage what we've been doing that works, and then we have to create some new scores to reach students and lifelong learners in ways that are different and somewhat personalized. The key is we all have to be in the same key. We have to be on the same page so that we understand when we play together that it comes out sounding somewhat musical and somewhat harmonized. And then we have to begin with the end in mind, the desired outcomes of what is this experience or this song that we're creating in the educational space. And then maybe the most important part is improvisation. Right now in the higher ed space, there is a lot of uncertainty. The pandemic accelerated a lot of what it means to educate students in a highly technical environment, meaning virtual. We're reaching students now in ways at scale. There's been online universities and online learning for quite some time, but suddenly everyone had to do it, and out of necessity, not necessarily as a core part of your strategy. But it's going to increasingly become table stakes. And as you navigate the uncertainty of what's the right thing to do for your particular institution and what's the right way to do it, there's going to be a combination of sort of your core competencies and then an ability to improvise on top of that. And then, like any good song, for those of you that are familiar, for instance, with the blues or rock and roll, you have a 12-bar blues that goes through your 12 bars, and then it comes back to the root. And that's very comforting in music. And we're going to need to iterate and come back to our students and our faculty and staff and resolve and restart, because we're not going to figure this out in one fell swoop. So we're going to be going through an iterative process to develop the next generation of learning services. And then we'll do a Q&A. So hopefully I won't move too fast and lose you in the metaphor, but let's jump right in. So the inspiration is going to start with the student, but we also have to factor in some of the changes that are coming from them in the context of how they're going to, what are they going to do when they're done? They don't just want a degree, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to look through a different lens on what it is that the student wants. So that's part of what we're trying to do, is figure that out as we go. We have some good assumptions, and we're in the process of getting a lot of feedback from students and faculty and staff to sort of navigate that change. But what's clear is that they don't necessarily want just traditional degrees and traditional long-term careers. There's a concept out there of tours of duty. They want to be able to experience a number of different things, or be prepared to experience a number of different things. The idea that there's 30 years and a gold watch in their future is highly unlikely. In addition, they need personalized journeys, and it is not about college and then I go out and work. There's going to be continued education and reskilling beyond graduation. So we want to take a lifelong learner view. And they also need to learn in different ways. And there's been a lot of research and a lot of studies and a lot of work done on different modalities for learning and how to create content that is personalized to different learners' needs. We're going to need to harmonize that, especially now in a technical environment where the table stakes are raised and you have to try to reach out to these folks in ways that are now enabled through technology. But we also have to factor in the market. What's the market looking for? The market doesn't necessarily want traditional degrees. And quite frankly, maybe they never did. Sure, they'll screen resumes on degrees, but they want relevant skills. And it's increasingly important to them because we live in a fast-paced world where there's constant change and reskilling is required. And they need to manage a supply of skilled resources against a changing demand, existing demand. And as a result of that, they're going to also need to reconcile these tours of duties, because folks don't come and necessarily work for you for the rest of their life. And so now you have to figure out how to keep them interested, how to work with them to craft jobs that help you to retain them out in the marketplace. And so there's going to be a partnership to do this, to fund continuous learning. Traditionally, students, or more likely, I have 2 students graduating this Saturday, pay for their child's or children's education, or there's financial aid and public funding. But increasingly, there's probably going to be alternative funding models and partnerships that are market driven, where they have a stake in the game for what kind of skills are entering into the market. And the industry and companies, corporations, are going to need to figure out how to manage talent in different ways and provide ongoing education, presumably, or at least hopefully, in partnership with organizations and institutions that are delivering these learning experiences to students. So we're going to start, and it kind of moves us outside of the musical metaphor, but there's this concept of jobs to be done, and courtesy of Clay Christensen. And I'm not going to play the video here. Hopefully it won't start on its own. I think you have to click the link. But if you do have access to the presentation, or everyone has access to Google, I would encourage you to take a look at Clay Christensen's milkshake video. If you Google it, it'll pop right up to the top of the page. Because what it does is it forces you to look at what is the job that education is performing, or what's the specific job within your particular department or discipline. And it gives you an alternative view of looking at what the students need, and by extension, what faculty and staff need. Because if you thought about what a milkshake does, or you probably have never thought about what a milkshake does, or that it does a job for you. So I'm not going to play the video in the interest of time, but what I would do is encourage you to look at it. But what I will do is give you a little bit of background, is that you have to figure out what your milkshake is and what job it does for your students. And do you understand the voice of your students, your customer students, but do you understand what it is that they need? And are you getting that voice directly from them? How engaged are they and your faculty and staff in telling you what you need to know to guide both your strategy and your tactics? And that's why I would encourage you to look at your services and the learning services and the faculty and staff services that power your learning services. Look at them differently, so that you can start to come at it more comprehensively across a student journey that spans a number of different processes and market-facing experiences or student-facing experiences, because that is going to help you to break out of some of the traditional silos that you live in, where folks are attending to their traditional role in getting a student through a traditional process. And that just isn't going to be sufficient going forward. And I know there are a number of initiatives out there, and that in many instances here, I'm preaching to the choir, but it's going to be one of the most significant challenges is getting outside of the silos that exist where I am isolated in admissions, I'm isolated in advising, I'm isolated in financial aid. And even when I collaborate and partner, I may not always have the tools, the techniques, the insights to break down those silos. And I heard a perfect example yesterday where someone was talking about when faculty have to use email to communicate with a student, and none of those emails get into the case management. If you're fortunate enough for your institution to have a CRM in a place where, for instance, advisors can keep track of engagement with students. And so you lose rich information there because the faculty is talking to the students, but the advisors may not be aware of it, or it's buried in an email trail, or they're lucky to be copied on it. And so you have to start to connect those silos, even if folks are trying to rise up out of them and take a more comprehensive view of the student. So what are the desired outcomes? It's to understand that job to be done in education, placing that student at the center of the experience. So every time you ask a question, what does this look like from the perspective of the student? And then starting to look at it for personalizing their paths and their interactions across a diversity of needs along that journey. And then coming in with force to meet those needs by aligning the faculty and staff services. And again, this may sound like mom and apple pie, but I want to emphasize the collaborative role that needs to be played, where you can engage both your faculty and staff with your students to help you solve these problems and bring them into the problem solving process through some design-led thinking concepts. If you haven't already introduced agile practices, then I would argue it's going to be table stakes. Agile is purpose built for uncertainty, and you're going to need a higher level of agility in your organization, not just in your IT department. It's going to need to be a partnership with the business, and it's going to need to be from top to bottom. It cannot be just at the delivery level. Agile is a great methodology for empowering teams to get things done in priority order, but they will run into conflicting priorities, and you need to move up into a scaled agile framework to look at it across the entire set of strategic objectives and intents across a whole bunch of different aspects of the business. And the goal here is to scale your ability to deliver technology-powered learning if you're going to be pursuing a strategy in a hybrid world, which increasingly will be table stakes, which means you're going to have to address some of the areas around operations and supply chain. Supply chain is not a popular topic or moniker in higher ed, but if you think about it, you have to get content from here and get it in front of eyeballs. And that is a supply chain challenge, whether you call it that or not. And last but not least, and I've seen this in every disrupted industry I've worked in, and I'll give you a couple examples. You're going to have to understand and manage a new value calculator. You've developed experience and instinct around what a degree is worth. And there will be arguments, and there have been for years, over what a degree is worth. But when that starts to change on whether it is the degree that is satisfying the job to be done, and whether it's around decomposed or disaggregated skills and certificates and whatnot, it's going to upset your value calculator, because you're no longer measuring it in tuition by year, or a 4-year degree at a certain value. And the example I would give you is in publishing, where they used to acquire a book and they'd publish it in a hardback, and then they'd put it out in a trade paperback, and then they'd put it out in a mass market paperback. And most publishers could do the math in their head. They knew what a book was worth through that life cycle and through that format change. When the ebook came out, it completely upended that for some time, until they could understand what was the value of an ebook, what did it represent in their value, in their portfolio of products. And they had to go back through. And in fact, there was a huge, very public debate where Amazon said all books were worth $10. And it discounted the fact that books weren't just ink on paper, they were more than that. And I would contend that what we're doing to educate students is a lot more than just the coursework that they consume, but that's what we purchase right now, and that's what we present. So what happens when that starts to change, what you're purchasing and what you present? What does that do to your value calculator? And that's going to need to be factored in. So you're going to need to start to collect more information on what your costs are to serve and what price you can put on that. What is it worth to a student or to the person funding the student learning, for instance, in a corporate partnership? So some of the challenges that I'm seeing, and again, many of them are familiar, is that it starts with strong leadership, because strategy is critical to every business. But when you live in uncertain times, it's very common for the leadership to start to look a little disjointed and a little bit all over the place. Wait, we've got to go here. Wait, we've got to go there. And there's a lot of folks that say, I don't understand our strategy. So there needs to be at least some level of certainty around what we're choosing to do. We may have strategic uncertainty in many things we could do, but we need to be clear on what we're going to do, and to the greatest degree possible, why we're going to do that. Because if folks don't believe in the why, it's going to be very hard to connect that strategy to tactics and get folks to march to that beat, or to play that song. Because leadership is about dealing with the uncertainty, but then we have to drive it down into tactics and deal with the complexity. We have to manage that complexity, whether you're using a traditional waterfall process for delivering projects or you're delivering agile. You still need to give the team specific achievable goals and then send them in a direction to do that. Because if your strategy can't be turned into tactics, the famous quote, strategy without tactics is the slowest road to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before the defeat. Connecting that strategy to tactics can be very, very tricky and heavily reliant on a strong governance process. Deciding quickly we are going to do, or more importantly, in many instances, not do, because uncertainty creates a lot of opportunity. Can't do everything. What are we committed to doing? How does it apply to our strategy? And we'll talk a little bit later about continually doing context scanning around your strategy and your tactics, or your execution. But I think that's one of the single biggest challenges, is to provide strong, clear leadership that we are going in this direction, and this is how we're going to get there. And it may sound like, again, mom and apple pie and table stakes, but I find it to be one of the biggest challenges at every institution I've been in that had to go through a disrupted market. So the key that we're going to play in, how do you empower the players in your ensemble? Well, it starts with that clear leadership and direction, but you also have to give them some decision authority. You have to establish clear roles so that they know what they're supposed to do and what their respective parts are. But you do have to empower them. And that direction is what sets the key. You're all playing in this key. You're all playing towards this end. But you have to play collaboratively. You have to play off of each other. You have to work together to create the outcomes. The score is really clarifying those priorities. We are going to play within this arrangement, or within the score if you're building net new, and then give them paths for escalation, but also give them room for improvisation. When they have decision authority, they can take the ball fairly far, fairly fast. It's when they need a path to escalation because there's something in conflict, competition for resources, a lack of clarity, a lack of commitment, all of the important people dimensions that we have to manage and work together to clear. Then there's the instruments, which are the techniques, really the processes and systems and the methods that need to be put in play. The systems you came into this world of hybrid learning with clearly were not purpose built to deal with it, and there was a rapid adaptation. And thank technology for things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, where we were able to go virtual and continue to deliver learning at some level. But again, 2 kids graduated on Saturday. I can tell you that the first 2 years of college were very, very different than their last 2 years of college. And especially that 1 year where it was fully virtual. I'll reiterate that agile delivery and scaled agile when necessary is going to be probably table stakes and purpose built for dealing with uncertain times. And now we get into sort of that improvisational ability, this test and learn concept, this idea that large or small, that initiatives have a start date and have an end date is quite frankly, in my opinion, antiquated thinking. We are in a world where we have to iterate our thinking and address the changes at a higher rate of speed. And we need to test and learn because we can't be sure of the outcomes. It's something we've learned through the introduction of the kind of technologies we now take for granted. Once upon a time, technology was very transaction driven. And for those of you that can remember, it was green screen and you had to fill out every field and you went from field to field to field until you went to the next set of things you need to fill in. And then the web was born and WYSIWYG, or I should say WYSIWYG and the web, where you could now have a user that poked around and clicked in places you could never imagine. And they could very easily break your system. And they were using it for things that were increasingly less transactional. And I think we can all contend that the vast part and potentially and definitely the most valuable part of what we're doing to educate students is not transactional. It is not presenting courses and then giving them tests and finding out how they did. It has to be much more intimate and much more personal than that. It's not a series of fill in the blanks and check the boxes, or at least it can't be going forward. So we have to not only iterate on what we're doing to see what's the best way to reach our learners, what's the best way to empower our faculty and staff to reach the learners and serve the learners. And then we have to give folks the space to try and to fail. I'm not a big fan of the expression fail fast. But I do think we need to give people the opportunity to fail and then to listen to each other. That will help break down the silos. You can't improvise within a song if you're not listening to the other players. And I just want to be cognizant of time here and keep moving. So provide space for improvisation. If you're a team leader or if you're the CEO or president, or you're just a member of an agile team where the roles collapse into we're all hands on deck, people still need a clear direction. They need to know what their role is and what they're trying to do. So again, back to that empowerment. And then the band, do you have everyone you need? Does the team that's been tactically mobilized to go do something have the resources they need? And do they know what their roles are and their cues and how they're scored to deliver? And then what's their time signature? And there's sort of a bit of a metaphor there in that, do they have clear measurable objectives? Do they know what on time means? Do they have a cadence? Agile, every 2, 3, or 4 weeks, you're delivering something. Okay, but you're delivering something in pursuit of something more than just that one set of functionality. Do they have an idea of how long this song is and when their 12-bar blues is going to return to the root to reevaluate and figure out? Because the song keeps playing. We're in a disrupted space and it's not going to be start and end. There's no near-term end in sight to this evolution of what's happening, and it's going to need to be continually managed. Evolution does happen slowly, but in times of uncertainty, it feels like it's happening faster. So we have to manage that uncertainty so that we don't have ready, fire, aim and an urgency to lurch ahead and do something when in fact we need to take a more measured approach within the song we're trying to play, within the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Specific notes that you will need to hit, in my opinion, again, is I think we have an untapped resource. Bring the student body into the conversation and let them contribute directly. I personally think that we should make them a part of the problem-solving teams. We do co-ops, or students do co-ops, and the students go off and work over there. There's things they can do to learn real life skills, real marketplace relevant skills, probably right at your institution and probably on behalf of some of your the markets you serve and potential corporate partnerships you have. And you could engage your faculty and staff in doing that as well, working with the students to solve each other's problems, because this is a relationship and an exchange that's tied together, faculty and staff serving students, bring them together to solve some of these problems. And of course, you have to leverage technology, but people and processes are going to be the harder part. The technology will come along. If you're throwing technology at things, you're leading with solutions, and inevitably your iterative framework will take longer. So I want to make sure I leave some time for Q&A, but then there's resolve and restart, and that's get back and look in that iterative approach, because you won't have all the answers in one fell swoop. And so here's some context scanning you can take from Gartner. Is your strategy still valid? Is your strategy working? That pressure tests whether you're on the right track with your strategy. And then, are your execution plans still valid? And are you executing correctly? And I would encourage you to go through that context scanning iteratively across strategy and tactics or execution continually to reevaluate it, because things will keep changing as we go along. So I kind of raced through that and left 5 minutes for Q&A. So Stella, if you want to let me know if there are any questions that have come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike. That was great. And we do have a few questions. We've got a few minutes to take them, so I'll get straight into them. The first one is what about the idea of making learning less linear and more non-linear? So students explore topics that interest them within a field, and online learning isn't restricted by time. I guess because online learning isn't restricted by time, we can do that. You have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think we've all found that not only is there a need in the marketplace, there's increasingly a necessity based on where the learner is at and what they're able to do or not do. There's technical constraints and enablers that allow us to do that. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be back to the same question of why. What's the desired outcome? When you're allowing a student to learn at their own pace, what are you offering them? What is the outcome that you want them to achieve? Do you understand why they're doing that? And then how do you harmonize that against other needs where you want them to persist and finish? So how do you allow them enough space to learn at their own pace and learn on their own timeline? How do you harmonize that with learning modalities and learning techniques? And that's why this was important to say, how do we put the ed back in tech? We can technically enable nonlinear learning. That's not a big trick, and we've seen people do that for years. How do we do it in a way that's effective and efficient, and really gets the learner to where they need to be? Great,
thank you. You had a really interesting point about having a clear strategic direction and a clear why. And also you talked about being quite decisive as being an important element of the strategy. I just wondered, what role does the community have to play in determining that direction?
I think that's a good question. That depends on the culture of your institution. Are you willing to be more inclusive? How do you bring more voices to the table? I think if you take a student-centric approach, folks will lean into it because it abstracts it a little bit. There's no longer that territoriality or I have to have a seat at the table. It takes it away from what I need to do on behalf of my department and what I need to do to drive my goals and ambitions against what does the student need, and how is our strategy realizing those benefits or those outcomes. And so I think it's still tricky. I personally feel that organizations are flattening, and there's less of this hierarchical sort of top-down, 20th century or 19th century management paradigm. We're moving beyond that. And so I think you do still need to be more inclusive. I think you also want to be careful that strategies should be somewhat durable and well thought out. You shouldn't be changing your strategy every week. So you do need to kind of clarify up front, am I differentiating on my learning service or product, or am I differentiating on my customer service, or am I differentiating on my cost to serve? There needs to be something you're anchored in, because if you're changing your mind too often, you'll lose your students and you'll lose your organization. They'll be all over the place. Oh, wait, I'm the lowest cost provider. Oh no, I'm the highest customer service. Oh no, I have the best learning products. You've got to index towards something you're anchored in.
Great. I think probably we can squeeze in one more question. You spoke about providing space for improvisation, and we can see the importance of this, but in a space that, in a context that feels very high stakes, especially for students, do you have any practical advice or examples of how this can be done well whilst remaining supportive to students? So I guess that's really about kind of, you know, improvising. You said you didn't like fail fast, but you know.
Well, I think you can certainly start improvising with your faculty and staff first, because you can pressure test how things might work. You can pilot things with small student groups. You should always put the student at the center of it. But a big part of improvisation is in the development of and delivery of the services, is just to empower the teams to start informing what they do or don't do. And an example I would give you is there's a lot of work going on to reinvent education. There's a lot of really good stuff going on, but there are some basic things that need to be fine-tuned. There's still friction in existing processes. And if you empower a team to go tackle those processes that exist right in front of us, that the students are struggling with, because we get distracted sometimes by the big shiny objects and the big things we can do. We also have to attend to, is it working for the student? What's not working? And that's where you can take an improvisational approach and say, hey, how could we organize around these things that don't make it all the way up onto the masthead or don't make it to the top of the Agile pile? How do we contend with dealing with those things that incrementally make the student journey better? And so the improvisation can occur in any dimension of your business, whether it's delivering new services through faculty and staff or new student learning services. I agree it's high stakes if it's in front of the students, but you can bring the students into that process to pilot it, to pressure test it, to test and learn before you roll it out to everyone to find out that maybe was a lot, that our reach exceeded our grasp.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike. We are out of time, so it remains for me to say thank you so much for sharing that really, really interesting presentation. Next in track one, we'll be hearing from the Sri Ramachandra Institute of Higher Education and Research, and that will be on blended learning in health professional education in a developing country, how to simultaneously support both students and teachers. Or we have in track 2, sharing the enactment of contemplative and inclusive practices in blended work-based executive education programs, and that's with Newcastle University Business School. That will be in track 2. So I'll see you, if you're in track 1, I'll see you there. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks again, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah.